Who the hell do you think you are? I'm a cop, you black trash. Shut your mouth. Don't touch my kid, Riley screamed, grabbing 12-year-old Elijah Moore by the collar just for saying the earth is round. No questions, no warning. He slapped the boy across the face in the middle of Wilford Park. What he didn't know, Elijah is the son of Police Chief Isaac Moore, the man risking everything to clean out a corrupt force. What state are you in? If this happened to your child, what would you do? Watch till the end to find out. When justice has a name, who's left standing when the truth hits back? The Wilford Central Park shone brightly under the sunlight. On weekends, it became a gathering spot for affluent families, tents pitched closely together, children running wildly across the grass like disturbed bees. On the lawn near the pond, Elijah Moore, 12 years old with dark skin, wearing a white t-shirt and a blue baseball cap, was chasing after a few other kids. "Hey, if the earth were really flat, wouldn't we be running off the edge by now?" Elijah shouted, laughing crisply as his heel lightly kicked up the damp grass. "So what? Falling into space?" Nelson, the son of Officer Riley, ran behind him, panting. "Then you'd have to turn back. If you don't, you just fall straight down like in the game." Elijah made a free-fall gesture with his hand as some children burst out laughing. Only Nelson did not laugh. His face fell and then he frowned. "The earth is round, and these things are for white people to talk about. What do you guys know?" The atmosphere froze for a moment. Elijah stopped dead. "I'm just joking, but we do learn about orbits at school," he said softly. Nelson sneered, his eyes cold and sharp. "You think you're better than me? Just because you memorized that?" Without waiting for Elijah to respond, Nelson turned his back and walked away, muttering as he kicked an empty soda can. "People like him, give them a bit of knowledge, and they think they're superior." Elijah didn't chase after him. He stayed where he was, lightly gripping the edge of his shirt, eyes fixed on the deep green grass. Those around observed and judged this small quarrel between two children, reflecting the different ways their families raised them. A nearby mother told her own child, "If you make a mistake next time, don't blame others to excuse your fault." It seemed the matter would end there, but unexpectedly, less than 10 minutes later, a large figure strode through the tent area. Mark Riley, the local patrol officer, wore a black uniform with a badge firmly fixed on his right shoulder. His face was flushed red, his eyes bloodshot and glaring. "Elijah Moore, where are you?" His voice hissed through clenched teeth. Elijah looked up. Before he could speak, Riley lunged forward, grabbing him by the collar and yanking him back. The children scattered and fell silent. Riley leaned close to Elijah's face, his hot breath blowing straight onto the boy. "What did you do to my son, you little bastard? Who gave you permission to talk back to him?" Elijah said nothing, standing still, chest rising and falling. Riley tightened his grip, raised his hand and slapped hard. The sharp crack split the heavy atmosphere. Elijah's body jerked. He didn't fall, but trembled. His eyes opened wide, reddened but tearless, his lips pressed tightly, as if swallowing everything inside. Nearby, parents widened their eyes. Some startled parents pulled their children away, others turned their backs. No one spoke. Elijah slowly raised his head, hands hanging limp, neither resisting nor defending. Only his eyes began to glisten, the only sign revealing the humiliation endured in broad daylight. And this was only the beginning. From the far end of the lawn, a solitary figure quietly approached. Isaac Moore, a tall black man in a gray shirt, walked past clusters of tents, unnoticed. Yet his eyes never left the scene before him. His son, held by the collar on the street, the redness of a handprint still visible on his face. He didn't shout or rush like an angry father. He took slow, deliberate steps, each one pressing down on a fury about to explode. Riley still held Elijah tightly, his hand unyielding, shouting into the empty space. "Do you know who you're talking to? I'm a cop here. Black types like you should know your place." Elijah didn't respond. Looking down at the ground with his face lowered, hands limp, Riley's voice dropped as he tried to assert his power distance. "I can arrest you right now. A brat like you dares to talk back to my son?" Isaac stopped, standing before Riley, eyes cold and unwavering. He looked directly into the other man's eyes without blinking or backing down. His voice was calm, even, without pleading or revealing anger. Your name, badge number, and reason for your behavior. A flash of surprise crossed Riley's face, quickly replaced by contempt. Someone like you thinks you can demand that, Riley spat. Or do you want to go to jail with him, bastard? He emphasized the last two words as if they were a habitual curse requiring no thought. Isaac stood firm. Elijah glanced at his father, puzzled why he didn't do anything. Didn't grab him, didn't yell, yet he remained there, steadfast like a rock. Some parents pulled their children away, eyes avoiding the scene. No one came close or intervened. A woman pulled out her phone to record, but seeing Riley's gaze shift toward her, hurriedly hid it and looked down as if she had never been there. Silence enveloped the area, broken only by the gentle wind brushing over the grass. Elijah stood close to his father, the right side of his face flushed red, yet no tears fell. His eyes were strained but hard. The boy said nothing, as if trying to hold something back in his throat. Isaac looked at his son for a moment, then gently clenched his hand into a fist. But he did not raise it. He refused to equate the power of a father with the violence of a uniformed man. He slowly pulled a small notebook from his back shirt pocket, opened it, and wrote a few lines. No one could see what he wrote, but that action, that composure, was the heaviest blow to the system Riley represented. No resistance, no anger, just recording, just witnessing. Yet the entire area seemed frozen. On Isaac's shirt, the shoulder was nothing special. No badge, no rank, just a father in a gray shirt, standing in a park, facing an abusive officer. But tucked neatly in his chest pocket was a copper badge engraved with the words, Chief of Police, unseen, and it would remain so until the right moment. The campfire had died down, leaving only the red embers casting a faint glow on Isaac's solemn face. He sat motionless on the folding chair, his gaze fixed on the fading flames as if silently deciphering something from the quiet. Elijah had fallen asleep inside the tent, curled up instinctively as a form of defense, his hands still gently clutching the thin pillow. Soft footsteps came from behind. An elderly woman, a gray wool scarf draped over her shoulders and an old cloth bag in her arms, approached without asking or hesitating. Standing straight before Isaac, she pulled out a small, worn-out recorder, its plastic casing faded with age. "I thought you should have this," she said in a hoarse but clear voice. Isaac looked up, eyes slightly squinting reflexively. He took the device without opening or asking. She said nothing more, only nodding lightly before turning away. After a while, when the fire had almost completely died out, he switched on the recorder. The sound was far from perfect, but sharp enough for each word to cut through his ears like thin slices of a knife. A voice yelled piercingly, "You bastard!" followed by the rough sound of fabric being gripped, and then a sharp, unmistakable slap echoed. Elijah breathed heavily, a forced breath held back. Then came a steady, cold voice. "Name, badge number, and reason for your act. Everything was recorded in full, not a sentence missed or a word wasted." He turned off the device. His eyes, usually calm, flickered slightly, not because of the evidence, but because someone dared to speak up at the exact moment when everyone else remained silent. He stood and walked slowly toward the tent, but the old woman had turned back, as if she knew he would want to know why. "Why are you helping me?" Isaac asked for the first time, allowing his emotions to leak from his usual guarded shell. She looked at him without avoidance or a smile. "Because some things, if we don't stand up, we'll have to live with them for the rest of our lives." A gentle breeze brushed past, fluttering the edge of her thin coat. Isaac did not respond. He understood there was something greater behind her words, but did not press. No one needed to tell the whole story in one night. Before leaving, she said only one sentence without looking back. "If you really want to know why I recorded this, meet me tomorrow at house number 8 at the end of Maple Row." Isaac watched the figure disappear into the dim light. Not a stranger, not exactly an ally, but another piece in the puzzle that he had just begun to glimpse. He returned to his seat, placing the recorder beside him, eyes watching the dying embers. He realized this story had started before he even stepped into the park that day. Now it was unfolding, layer by layer, through the mouths of those whom the system had once forced into silence. House number 8 stood quietly at the end of Maple Street, separated from the bright white mansions at the beginning of the road. Isaac stood on the porch, covered in dry leaves, his hand lightly touching the chipped wooden door frame. The door opened before he could knock. Ava greeted him with a calm, unsurprised look, needing no introduction. She invited him inside. The small house contained nothing unnecessary. Every item was clean, placed neatly, reflecting a life ordered to the point of stillness. In the old kitchen, light filtered through thin curtains as she poured 2 cups of tea. Her hands trembled slightly, lifting the teapot, but her voice was steady. "I don't often tell stories, but if you need to know why I recorded that event, the answer lies here." She gestured toward the small wooden table in the middle of the room. Ava placed her hand on the cup, not looking at Isaac, her eyes fixed on a faded photo frame on a corner shelf. "My husband Thomas was beaten to death by the police 11 years ago, in broad daylight, right in front of me." She spoke decisively, without softening, as if she had rehearsed this sentence for years. "We were at the supermarket. He went ahead to get the car. Someone saw him leaving the store, didn't recognize him, and called to report a suspicious person." Her voice slowed but did not falter. "When I ran out, I saw 3 officers holding him down on the ground. One kicked his back hard, another handcuffed him, and the last one laughed. I shouted. They said he was resisting, but he only said one sentence, 'I am a citizen here. I have done nothing wrong.'" Isaac did not interrupt. He looked at her silently, as if collecting every word to etch into memory. "I went to the morgue with my grandson. His body was covered in bruises. There was a clear shoe print on his left shoulder. The newspapers wrote it off as an unfortunate incident during duty. None of the 3 officers was prosecuted. The case was closed after 3 weeks with the conclusion of no internal wrongdoing." Ava tightened her grip around the now cold cup of tea. Isaac looked down at the tiled floor, not because he was unaware such things had happened before, but because he never thought he would hear it from a witness who had remained standing after all that. He looked up and quietly asked, "Have you ever thought about suing?" Ava did not answer immediately. After a moment, she nodded softly. "I tried. A lawyer agreed to take the case, but the lawsuit never reached court, because the police's legal representative was Harold Crane." She looked directly at him as she spoke the name. Isaac remained still. This was the second time the name had appeared in 2 days. Ava nodded slowly as if reading his thoughts. "I don't seek revenge. I no longer have the strength to pursue justice, the way people talk about it in the news, but if you intend to go all the way, I will no longer remain silent." Light filtered through the curtain, sparkling on the cold cup of tea. Isaac nodded, tilting his head slightly for the first time as a sign of acknowledgement. "We will not repeat history." Ava stood up and walked to a low cabinet corner, pulling out an old, carefully wrapped envelope. She placed it in front of him. "I kept a copy of the autopsy report, just in case it's ever needed." He took it without opening, only squeezing it lightly as if grasping the final fragment of a truth forced into silence for too long. Messages arrived while Isaac was tidying his desk. The screen displayed a brief, anonymous line without greeting. "Don't trust what remains in the system. I keep the original." The location attached was an old cafe deep in the southern suburbs, so quiet that few people still visited. No geotag, no avatar, just a single line. Yet it was enough to make Isaac pause, stand still for a few seconds before leaving his house. The cafe had a tin roof, inside only a few wooden tables and chairs, with the strong smell of burnt coffee. A man sat in the darkest corner, tall, broad-shouldered, with dark skin and eyes both wary and calm. He wore a thick jacket, placing before him a pair of worn leather folders. When Isaac sat down, the man did not ask his name or confirm his identity, only pushed the files towards him. "What do you need, and what they want to bury along with me?" Isaac opened the files. Each page bore marks of having been printed from the internal system. Some sections were stamped "not qualified for release." Others lacked official document numbers. At the top was a copy of the disciplinary report on Officer Riley, clearly stating misconduct in using force outside procedure, recommending suspension. Next was a report from the Internal Oversight Unit, circulated only within command levels. It described repeated misconduct by Riley, reported 3 times by Jeremiah Knox himself. Isaac continued flipping pages. A short statement in neat handwriting, signed at the bottom, Jeremiah L. Knox. The man looked up at Isaac, but before he could speak, Jeremiah began, "I handed this over to the inspection unit. 3 days later, I was transferred to the supplies warehouse. 1 month later, I received an early retirement decision, without any reason." His voice was steady, without bitterness, but every word settled like a small stone thrown onto still water. He placed a finger on one of the crumpled pages. "If I were white, this would have been front-page news long ago." Isaac turned to another page. The top right corner faintly showed Harold Crane's approval stamp. That name appeared for the 3rd time, this time no longer a shadow. Isaac stared at the paper as if it contained something bigger than the printed content. "You don't have to believe me," Jeremiah said, looking up. "I know what you're doing, and for whom. But if you intend to overturn this, you must know they're not just hiding one officer. They're protecting a whole system, one that exists through violence, discrimination, and purposeful silence." No one raised their voice or said more. Isaac closed the files, palms slightly sweaty. The evidence lay on the table, but the cost to turn them into public truth, he understood, was far beyond a simple nod. The coffee in the cup had cooled. Jeremiah remained still, eyes drifting through the dusty window pane. The cafe was empty, silent except for the wind rustling outside the bushes. He took a small sip, set the cup down, and then looked at Isaac with eyes void of emotion. "I used to be a patrol officer in the East District," he began slowly and evenly, not trying to impress. 6 years ago, I met Riley for the first time when he was newly assigned to the unit. One weekday afternoon, we were called because of a report about a suspicious teenager wandering through a high-end residential area. When we arrived, I saw Riley had stopped that boy without asking or explaining, just shouting and pressing his head onto a car hood. The teen was only 15, wearing a hoodie, empty-handed, standing outside a friend's house he intended to visit. Jeremiah paused, voice lowering slightly. I stepped forward, told him to stop, said he had to take the boy to the station if he wanted to clarify, and that a guardian must be present. Riley looked at me as if I had just betrayed him. Isaac did not interrupt, eyes fixed on the wrinkles etched around Jeremiah's mouth. The very next day, I was reprimanded. The internal report stated that my behavior undermined team spirit and failed to support a colleague in a risky situation. I didn't respond. I understood what was happening. Jeremiah continued, voice unchanged. After that, I was transferred to the supplies warehouse, then to logistics. Less than 2 months later, I received an early retirement decision, though I never requested it, and wasn't officially eligible. I didn't resist. I quietly left, but before that I copied all related files. I knew they'd vanish from the system within days, like many other cases. He looked directly at Isaac. I once considered going public, sending it to the press, but no outlet published it. I tried. The response was always the same. No body, no video, no riot, no news. They only cared when blood was spilled or crowds rose up. A teenager's head pressed onto a car hood wasn't enough to open the 6 o'clock news. Isaac bowed his head slightly, fingers interlaced. The cafe remained silent, but the atmosphere had shifted. Jeremiah nodded lightly, then continued. The Elijah case was the first with everything they previously lacked. There was filming, recording, and timely resistance. If you don't seize this moment, what I brought, what Ms. Ava kept, will be forgotten again. Next time, it might be another child, not as lucky as Elijah. Isaac looked up, his gaze heavy. The pieces were gradually revealing themselves, but placing them correctly, so the whole picture emerged, remained a choice with no turning back. The evening passed slowly in the small office separated at the back of the house. Isaac sat at the wooden desk, the yellow light casting down on the piles of documents spread before him. Each sheet seemed to carry an old memory, forced into oblivion, now gradually surfacing with every line, every faded ink mark. He did not read as someone seeking information, but as one clearing a minefield, careful, patient, understanding that something lay between the lines, not within them. His eyes stopped at an investigation report on abuse of power from 1993. A name struck him like a cold piece of metal piercing his memory. Michael Riley, a senior officer in the Metropolitan Patrol Unit. Isaac straightened, not out of surprise, but because something inside him momentarily froze. That name was familiar, seen somewhere before, neither clear nor unknown, like an echo trapped between two walls. He left the desk and opened the bottom drawer of the cabinet, where he kept an old file untouched for years. It was the dossier on his father's death, Luther Moore, which had been closed without trial. One confirmation sheet listed the task force from that day, with 3 names italicized. The third was Michael Riley. Auckland had. Isaac said nothing. He stood in the middle of the room, eyes down on the 2 documents now side by side. 1 name, 2 incidents, 30 years apart, both carrying consequences that no one had ever been held accountable for. He returned to the desk and flipped to the back page. The handwritten statement said Luther Moore had fled when asked to stop his vehicle. But Isaac knew his father was not the kind to run from the police. The man had always taught him to obey the law, even when the law betrayed him. His mind began piecing together the facts. Riley Sr. had participated in the chase that led to his father's death. Riley Jr. had just slapped his son in the park. Not a coincidence. This was the consequence of a power chain maintained, learned, and encouraged by a system that always protected those wearing the badge, regardless of what they had done. Isaac cross-checked the badge number, confirming it was the biological father of Officer Mark Riley. All doubts vanished. He went to the pin board and posted the 2 document copies side by side, pinning them tightly as if to establish a relationship once concealed. For the first time since the Elijah incident, Isaac no longer saw Riley as an uncontrolled individual, but as a loyal descendant of a bloodline that had brought death to his father. The night wind slipped through the door crack, stirring some papers. He paid no attention. His mind was deep in a chilling truth. Mark Riley was not the problem. He was merely the final manifestation of a larger, older, and far dirtier structure than any report could record. The light in the office remained on as Isaac flipped through the time-stamped file, mostly yellowed at the edges. He selected a forensic report marked in red ink years ago. The first line confirmed the cause of death: traumatic brain injury from a hard impact on the asphalt. But in the last annotation was a detail few noticed then. The hematoma on the neck did not match the fall direction described in the official statement. Isaac reread the short passage that seemed intentionally obscured. The case was concluded as a consequence of a chase, with no clear evidence of excessive violence. The report was signed by Sergeant McDavis, but there were no crime scene photos, no witness cross-checks, and only one-sided testimonies from 3 officers directly involved in the task force. Among them, Michael Riley was the only one who did not submit a handwritten report, but a typed version from the unit chief. The internal investigation file was closed in less than 3 weeks, approved by a name now all too familiar, Harold Crane, then head of the Civil Inspection Department. Isaac lightly brushed the signature line, feeling as if touching the dust of 3 decades deliberately buried. Next to the file was his mother's personal note, neat, aligned handwriting with some parts erased and rewritten. She had met a lawyer after her husband's death, but was advised to stay silent to protect your son's future career. An internal police memo showed the family could receive funeral expense support if they promised not to sue. Isaac held the paper, fingers gripping the edges tightly. The silence was not from helplessness, but from pressure. He revisited the only testimony from an anonymous witness who called the internal hotline on the day of the incident. The recorded voice described, "An officer pushed Luther Moore from behind after he said he was not running away. No names, No one knew who that was. The testimony was classified as unverifiable and excluded from the main file. The final piece was the duty assignment list from that day. Michael Riley was assigned to drive the chase vehicle, but with a special note, authorized to handle the situation based on personal judgment. Isaac stared at that line for a long time. What his father faced was not an accident, but the result of unchecked power entrusted to those well aware that the system always had their backs. He stood up, took 2 pins, and fastened the 2 documents onto the pin board. On one side was his mother's note, on the other the duty assignment with Michael Riley's name. No sigh, no curse, only silence transforming into action. Some deaths need no gunshot. They come from a fall, a stamped paper, a cold signature, and to change that, more is needed than a father whose pride was just slapped. In an old tin box under the bed where his mother once slept, Isaac found a bundle of files tied with a faded cloth string. Inside were documents not part of the official system, mostly copies kept separately with the rest handwritten notes. Among the papers, he pulled out a thin document printed on old official letterhead. At the bottom was a sharp, concise signature, Harold Crane. The title beside it read, Head of Civil Inspection Department. Directly under the signature, a brief note stated, insufficient grounds to continue investigation, case closed as an occupational accident. Isaac stared at the line, his hand trembling slightly. Though written in familiar official language, to him it was more than words. It was a knife cutting through his family's life, legalized by a signature. He flipped to the back page. A proposal to convene a task force to reinvestigate the scene was signed by another name, Harold Myers, an independent investigator, with an assessment that there is inconsistency between the task force testimonies and autopsy results. But that proposal was never carried out. Isaac underlined in red the annotation. Myers disappeared from the records afterward, leaving no further reports. Pieces began to come together. Isaac opened more old files, searching for pages related to internal cases suspended during the same period. The name Harold Crane appeared at least 4 times, always as the final approver. In a 1998 news report, he was mentioned as the overseer of police internal process reform, a campaign praised by the media, but in reality, no one could recall what had actually been reformed. Isaac stood up straight, took a deep breath, not out of anger, but because every layer of dust he had just brushed away led back to one man. Harold Crane was not a peripheral figure. He was the pivot, OT ensuring every wrongdoing was shielded at the right moment. If Michael Riley was the one wielding the baton, Crane was the one keeping the record of who should be protected and who could be erased from the files. He glanced at Elijah, sitting in the living room reading, completely unaware that his childhood had almost been stolen by the very power seated in wood-paneled meeting rooms adorned with badges. Isaac wondered how many children like his son had been pinned down, labeled disturbers, then vanished from the system simply because no one dared open old files to read again. Returning to his desk, he printed out all documents bearing Harold Crane's name over the past 30 years, every approval, every case closure, every transfer of investigators. Once stacked, he took a pen and wrote clearly on the file cover, "The Gatekeeper," not because he acted directly, but because he was the one who unlocked every cover-up, then stood aside as if innocent. Back in his office, Isaac started his personal computer, assigned specifically for the chief of police. The internal system booted up, scanning numerous closed case files. He typed Riley's name into the search bar, narrowing results to the past 7 years. Dozens of files appeared, mostly related to complaint handling. Isaac filtered, focusing on those with notes. Referred to Senior Disciplinary Board, no further action. He opened each case one by one. 4 familiar names appeared. Not because they were shocking, but because they had been quietly buried among cold official minutes. One case, dated early in the year, accused Riley of arresting a man outside his home without a search warrant or arrest order. The case ended with an internal report, no notification to the victim's family, and a line reading, "Internal warning, no recurrence." The second case involved a 15-year-old youth beaten in an interrogation room. The report came from a trainee officer who was later transferred out. In the file, Riley's testimony was fully recorded, but the board's conclusion was abruptly stamped insufficient evidence of intentional fault. The chairman of the board, Harold Crane, the third case, accused Riley of confiscating a woman's phone while she was filming during a document check. The phone was later returned, but all recorded footage disappeared. The woman filed a complaint with the Civil Investigation Office, but was told no basis to confirm intentional interference with personal device. The fourth involved a suspect seriously injured after a high-speed chase, though initial records stated the person did not attempt to flee when asked to stop. Traffic camera footage showed Riley's vehicle closely tailing. However, the investigation report concluded situation within operational safety limits. The common factor in all four cases was not the content, but how they ended. Each file bore a final assessment signed by Harold Crane, using identical wording, insufficient grounds for disciplinary action. Isaac reread the phrase, feeling how power transformed wrongdoing into a non-reissue. Scrolling to the bottom of one report, he found a mistakenly attached email. Priority must be given to maintaining frontline force stability. Isaac leaned back in his chair. No more doubts. No more ambiguity. He was facing not only an officer accustomed to abusing power, but a machine that knew exactly when to keep silent, pivot rightly, and protect the right people. Every decision he was about to make would not only affect Riley but also challenge Crane's position, striking many layers of power behind the scenes. He knew that once he reopened files previously sealed by a commissioner's hand, there was no turning back. Isaac opened a drawer, took out an old notebook. He flipped to the first blank page, writing a single line: start with Riley, end with Crane. Under the dim, fluorescent lights of the data storage room, Isaac sat motionless before the screen, his hands resting lightly on the keyboard without typing. A warning flashed on the screen in a flickering red frame, reading, "Access denied. This section is restricted by the highest level administrator," with a smaller line below stating approval, Harold Crane. Everything began with a simple call. A former colleague who had worked in the complaint monitoring unit quietly contacted Isaac, uttering only one sentence before hanging up. Riley's files are gone. That brief statement struck directly at a suspicion that had been simmering inside him for days. Isaac logged into the department's central data system using his highest administrative privileges. He entered old file codes one by one, but most were marked handled internally, and some entries no longer existed. Complaints from the black community, especially those related to Riley, ended uniformly with the phrase, "no signs of violation." What chilled Isaac was the timing of these edits. Only weeks ago, coinciding with Elijah's attack, he opened the system log to trace every access, finding approval codes leading directly to the city inspector's office, overseen by Harold Crane. But this was not the whole story. Digging deeper, Isaac reviewed older files, reports from 1993 and 2008 that had long been forgotten. Many documents were encrypted under meaningless names. He contacted Min, an IT specialist he had once protected when Min was a rookie, for help. After several hours, Min recovered a series of drafts hidden by the system. Among them were crossed-out lines still readable. Riley's files need re-examination, and repeated signs of abuse of power. Isaac sat quietly for a long time after reading. There was no doubt left. This was not a few individuals manipulating files, but a system established, maintained, and disguised under administrative procedures for decades. The internal complaint handling mechanism, once considered a tool for supervising power, had become a filtering net. Whenever accusations arose, they were not dismissed, but escalated to higher levels, where everything was suspended indefinitely. He began backing up all documents, every log entry, each edit, and every person with access rights. He did not save them on the system, but copied them to a separate hard drive stored in his desk drawer. He shared this with no one, not even close associates. This was his only weapon and last resort if all other paths were blocked. When he tried to access another data section to complete cross-checking, the warning appeared again. For the first time in his career, he, the highest authority in the department, was denied access. The name displayed was cold, like a full stop to all suspicion: Harold Crane. Isaac shut down the screen, pulled the hard drive from the computer, and placed his hand on it as if holding living evidence of deceit. That night, Wilford was silent, but Isaac knew the system had begun to react, and this time it could no longer hide. Returning to the office late in the day after encrypting and securely hiding the hard drive containing evidence of manipulation, Isaac walked through the long, empty hallway, the dim light from tube lamps reflecting off the gray stone floor. Everything was silent, yet he felt something else stirring, not from him, but from those watching him. On his desk lay a folded A4 sheet, without sender or signature. The handwriting was messy, but certain. If you touch Crane, you will lose your position. There are things you do not need to know to do your job well. Isaac froze briefly before placing the note in the drawer. He was not surprised, but could not ignore that the warning had shifted from metaphor to open form. The warning coincided with subtle but clear changes around him. Some meetings were suddenly canceled without reason. Documents were passed to others for approval. A senior officer in command, who had supported Isaac when he first took office, now avoided his gaze and answered every question with, "I don't know," or "Let me check again." In an internal meeting days later, when Isaac mentioned re-examining manipulated files, an administrative head interrupted with a voice half challenging, half pitying, "I think the director should reconsider his priorities. Not everyone wants to dig up old matters. If you keep pushing, you will drag the entire organization into chaos." Isaac said nothing. He was too familiar with how this system operated, not by guns or detention orders, but by internal corrosion. They did not need to force silence, only to make every word meaningless, amid a flood of empty reports and evasive decisions. That evening, he arranged a private meeting with someone once considered Crane's extended arm within the department, but recently shown hesitation. This person did not appear at the cafe as scheduled, but left a small note under Isaac's cup. "I cannot help you, but someone who was once on Riley's team, now unbound. His name is Alan." It was the first time Isaac had heard that name during his investigation. He noted it down, then stood and left the cafe, leaving warnings and silence behind. If the system thought it could push him into passivity with an anonymous note or evasive glances, they did not understand that he no longer acted for career but for a child who had just learned to write an apology letter despite doing nothing wrong. From that day, Isaac stopped expecting allies. He kept only 3 things: the truth, patience, and a hard drive ready to explode the moment the right person touched it. On a Monday morning, while the sky was still covered by a thin mist quietly creeping through the trees, Elijah Moore received an envelope from the school office. The 12-year-old boy did not expect to be named, nor did he imagine that he would be absent from class that day. The message was brief and cold. Elijah Moore is suspended for 3 days due to disorderly conduct and disrupting the school environment. The paper was signed by the vice principal and officially stamped, as if the fault lay entirely with him. Elijah was stunned when he read the last line. In his heart, the park remained a moment of chaos, not yet settled, yet he had never thought that his only actions, laughing and trying to explain what he believed to be true, would be regarded as the cause of disturbance. He folded the paper, put it into his backpack, and then silently joined breakfast, without letting anyone at home know what had happened. At school, some classmates had heard rumors. A few timidly asked if he had really got into a fight with Nelson, the son of Officer Riley. Elijah gave no answer. Others avoided his gaze when passing by, steering clear of sitting at the same table. The homeroom teacher still took attendance as usual, but did not mention the incident. No one defended him, no one asked what really happened. The silence around him was heavy, like a glass wall, transparent but unbreakable. That noon, Elijah was called to the principal's office. The person in charge handed him a copy of the decision, repeating mechanically that the school has autonomy and all disciplinary measures are aimed at ensuring a positive learning environment. There was no explanation, no dialogue. As he turned to leave, a young teacher quietly pulled him aside into a corner, whispering, "There are things beyond the classroom. You understand?" Elijah nodded gently, though he understood nothing. Back home, he said nothing. Dinner passed in an unusual silence. Isaac noticed the lack of usual brightness in his son's eyes, but did not ask. Elijah ate slowly, then asked to go to his room early. In the dark, he took down his science award certificate from the wall, tore it into pieces, and threw it into the trash. It was not because he hated the subject, but because he began to believe that knowledge or effort could not save someone from being judged by skin color. Ava, who had witnessed more than once how the system crushed truth, heard the news and started to investigate. She called an old acquaintance who once worked at the local education funding council. The result chilled her. Wilford High School had just received a special grant from the Harold Crane Foundation, a funding package named Building a Safe Educational Environment. In the appendix, there was a clause stating, "The funding body reserves the right to consult on disciplinary policies for students in special circumstances." Ava printed all the documents, placed them in a thick envelope, and wrote Isaac's name on it. The next day, Elijah stayed in his room all day. He typed a few lines in his phone diary, deleted them, and retyped. "First day suspended, not for fighting, not for laziness. Because I laughed. Because I'm black." He looked up at the ceiling, wondering if someday anyone would believe what truly happened. He was just a child, but he understood that something wrong was starting to surface, and adults were choosing to look away. The next morning, Isaac Moore entered the gates of Wilford High School wearing a simple shirt, his eyes calm yet resolute. He did not come as the police chief, but as a father wanting to protect his son, who was being punished for something even the school could not clearly explain. The receptionist looked at him for a moment, then gave a faint smile. "The principal is in meetings all day. Would you like to leave a message?" Isaac replied shortly, "I will wait." He sat in the waiting area for nearly an hour, eyes fixed on the frosted glass door behind the reception desk. No one came out nor invited him in. When the clock struck the hour, an employee brought out a folded piece of paper and handed it to Isaac. On it was a brief handwritten note. "I'm afraid the matter involving your son has been handled according to regulations. We cannot reconsider without new evidence." Isaac said nothing, folded the paper, and put it in his pocket. As he stood to leave, his eyes caught a recognition plaque hanging in the main hallway. Below the words, "Honorary Sponsor," was the golden logo of the Harold Crane Foundation, standing out among a list of other organizations. He stared for a long time, then left, without leaving a message, or hope that anyone at the school truly wanted to listen. That evening, Ava handed Isaac a set of printed documents, including official sponsorship pages she had found in public databases. They contained not only information about Wilford School's annual funding, but also a clause. The funding body reserves the right to consult on internal policies, especially in cases related to school image and safety. Isaac needed no further explanation. The pieces of the larger picture were coming together. He knew this was no longer just his son's story, but about how power seeped into every school wall without needing to pass through the front door. News of Elijah's suspension began leaking on social media, initially from a parent of a classmate. Early posts appeared with the hashtag #Stand with Elijah. Although not yet strong, it quickly divided the community into two opinions. One side believed the school was right and that discipline was necessary to maintain order. The other questioned the true motive behind the disorder and why a student who caused no disturbance was suspended without any meeting with the parent. That night, while Elijah was reading, Isaac entered his room and gently placed a stack of papers on his desk. It was a photocopy of an official complaint sent to the state education board. He said nothing more, just lightly touched his son's shoulder, then quietly left. Elijah looked at the papers for a while, then pulled a leather-bound notebook from the drawer. He wrote the first line carefully, without pause. "The first day, I wasn't allowed to go to school, not for breaking rules, but for being myself." The small sentence felt like a deep engraving in his memory. From that moment on, silence was no longer a refuge. After a long day struggling with distorted reports and irregular data sequences, Isaac returned home later than usual. The empty apartment was bathed in a dim yellow light that cast a hazy layer over the old bookshelves. He did not turn on the television as usual, nor did he take off his tie. Instead, he quietly walked into the small storage room at the end of the hallway. In a dusty corner of the cabinet, he found the wooden box his mother once used to keep mementos never spoken of. When he opened the lid, the first thing that caught his eye was a wristwatch with a cracked glass face and a worn leather strap, its hands frozen at a moment he had never forgotten. The watch his father had worn. Just looking at that object, a flood of memories surged like a long-suppressed storm. Isaac was taken back to a rainy night in his childhood when he stood by the old wooden door, watching his mother tremble and cry beside the telephone. The wind howled outside. Raindrops lashed against the window like persistent knocks. Yet his father never returned. His mother had called dozens of times with no answer. The next morning, the local newspaper ran a cold headline: "Black officer dies in pursuit duty." Below the headline was a photo of a crushed car. No body, no suspect name, no witnesses. Isaac remembered how his mother silently read the paper, then folded it as if burying a part of her life. The article described the death as an unfortunate accident, stating the officer had accidentally collided with the pursuit vehicle, and mentioned signs of disobedience but not clearly established. Each word seemed programmed to conceal the real truth. The accident time did not match the shift hours, and the location was far from his father's assigned patrol area. But Isaac was only 10 years old then, and no one allowed him to question. The family never received a copy of the accident report, and no internal investigation was made public. Everything was wrapped up in an official envelope stamped in red, "Internal case closed." Growing up with gaps in memory, Isaac carried a strange emptiness. Every time he was about to ask, he met his mother's silent gaze, or the subtle headshake of those who had once been his father's friends. "Forget it, son. Living is enough," they often said. Yet throughout those years, Isaac held on to a thought that never fully faded. Now, facing the system manipulation network orchestrated by Crane, witnessing missing files and altered data, the familiar feeling returned as a chill. His father's death. Could it be a link in the chain of deliberate silence? He sat down at the desk and opened his investigation notebook. The desk lamp cast a long strip of light over the paper, his hand trembling slightly as he held the pen. After years of avoidance, he wrote the first line about the forgotten death, not as a son recalling pain, but as an investigator finally seeing the logic of a system hiding the truth through indifference. Some deaths are not accidents. They are programmed outcomes. Isaac looked up, staring at his father's black and white photo on the shelf. He whispered, "I will not let them erase you as they have done." The quiet night enveloped the small workspace. Isaac sat at the desk, the light from the lamp illuminating the open file. Among the lines of text, his mind drifted back to the past, to the woman who had never cried loudly in his life, but bore wounds never voiced. His mother, who lived in the shadow of a loss no one dared name. He clearly remembered the funeral morning. In the cramped room of the local church, she sat motionless like a statue. No tears, no complaints, only a crumpled complaint letter in her hand. A letter never submitted. After the funeral, she went alone to the Internal Affairs office, but was stopped at the door. The officer on duty said briefly, "The case is closed, no reason to reconsider." She returned home with an expressionless face, put the letter into a drawer, and locked it, as if burying a part of her dream for justice. Years later, when Isaac was a teenager, he sat with his mother in the kitchen, where silent meals had become routine. One evening, he asked if he could enroll in the police academy. For the first time, she slammed her hand on the table, eyes flashing as if a fire long suppressed was unleashed. "The police do not protect people like your father," she said, "and you don't have to die like he did." Those words were not a prohibition but a plea, a desperate scream from deep within painful memory. After that day, she grew even quieter. Isaac remembered one morning when she received an anonymous envelope containing only one line, "Your son could be next." No one knew who sent it or how to trace it. But just days later, she refused all interviews, cut contact with lawyers who had supported them, and even stopped mentioning his father's name. When Isaac asked, she only shook her head with a dark look. "He's dead. You are alive." Time passed. She lived quietly beside her son, never leaving the city but never allowing herself to speak the truth. Isaac grew up in that silence, not forgetting but with a persistent reminder. He gradually understood his mother did not give up. She was forced to survive, not because she was weak, but because the system was cruel enough to make even the strongest choose silence to protect their loved one. Each time Isaac flipped through altered files, faced Riley in meetings, or looked at Crane's calm face on the screen, his mother's voice echoed in his mind. "You don't need to win. You just need not to be silenced." That was not an instruction, but a shield protecting him from becoming part of the vicious cycle that had killed his father. That night, when all was silent, Isaac opened the old drawer and took out the yellowed black and white photo. In it was his mother standing by his father's coffin, her gaze steady and unshaken but full of resistance. He placed the photo on the table, bowed his head, and whispered, "I do not forget, and this time I will not back down." Under the damp yellow light of the storage room behind the old city hall, Isaac Moore stood facing Jeremiah Knox, who had once been his loyal associate before being forced to resign for leaking inappropriate content from the internal data warehouse. In the air, thick with the smell of decayed paper and old electronics, Jeremiah opened a locked metal cabinet and pulled out a dusty, old, small server. "It hasn't been part of the internal network for nearly 8 years, he whispered. "But I kept this piece of data, just never dared to use it." Isaac remained silent, staring at the cold metal drive as if it contained all the confessions the system tried to hide. Jeremiah connected the server to his personal laptop, using offline recovery software instead of network access to avoid surveillance by the system controlled by Harold Crane. A series of encrypted codes appeared on the screen. They had to wait several hours to process the outdated format. Data frames slowly opened, but when the first report appeared, Isaac knew this was what they had been looking for. The first line was a discarded frontline officer's report describing systematic abuse of power. The report was withdrawn within less than 18 hours, approved by Harold Crane, who was then just the city's assistant inspector. Next was a report on Riley from 2008, before his promotion. The original note indicated excessive use of coercion, later altered to intervention following proper procedure. Isaac's hand began to tremble as he saw the system logged multiple edits. Up to 70% of complaints involving people of color were labeled handled internally, with no concluding records. Every trace funneled into a single path, all handled through one portal, an admin account registered under Crane's name. "This isn't a few erroneous records anymore," Isaac said. "It's a programmed structure designed to hide all racially motivated violations." Jeremiah sat silently, eyes tracking each line on the screen. His face revealed torment, as if every file was a slap on the silence he once kept. "I knew this," he whispered, "but I didn't have the courage. Now, maybe, it's time." Isaac did not reply. He was backing up all the data to an external hard drive, typing commands decisively. Each file, each report, and each edit log was packaged and re-encrypted. "We cannot afford mistakes," he said. "One error, and everything will disappear forever." As the backup neared completion, Jeremiah quietly opened a drawer, took out a USB labeled with faded ink, and handed it to Isaac. "I've held on to this for too long," he said. "It's the last fragment of a man who once believed conscience would prevail. Ava's husband, you know him." Isaac accepted it silently, but now his eyes no longer showed pain. They held the look of someone who had touched the core of the system he swore never to leave untouched. The small USB was placed on the cracked wooden table in the storage room. Isaac looked at it like an ancient bone unearthed from the rubble of the past. He plugged it into the laptop and sat beside Jeremiah, who turned his back to the door, arms crossed, eyes fixed on the screen. The data on the USB was protected by a simple encryption layer, likely meant to deter curious eyes rather than block a real technician. When the single file appeared, an untitled audio segment began to play automatically. A man's voice sounded first, unclear but recognizable as Ava's husband, who was then still a community investigator. He spoke in a deep, steady tone. "I have recorded at least 3 cases of unofficial pursuits this month." The team leader was always Riley Sr. A sigh followed, then he continued, "They not only overstep, but do so systematically. Every time someone different appears in the central neighborhood, they coordinate patrols that match the timing." Another voice responded, coldly, curtly, and indifferently. Riley Sr. did not deny it, but spoke as if preaching. "We keep order by cleaning out the trash from the start. Don't say I didn't warn you. Once they see we won't act, they'll climb right over us." His voice chuckled lightly, then the sound of a glass tapping the table, followed by silence for several seconds. Jeremiah didn't look at Isaac. He bowed his head into his hands, his shoulders trembling slightly. Isaac clenched his fists. His gaze deepened. This conversation was no longer indirect evidence. It was an almost raw confession, showing how a generation of officers enforced a silent law, without records or direct force, but enough to create fear and death. After the main dialogue, the recording continued for a few more minutes. Ava's husband spoke as if he knew he was recording for the last time. "If I die because of this, don't look for the culprit. His name is on every timesheet, every withdrawn report. Let someone brave enough dig through the files and ask the right questions. No gunshots, no chases, but that ending made the surrounding space feel suffocate, as if oxygen had been drained." Isaac stopped the file, did not replay it. He saved the audio alongside the data Jeremiah had just extracted. Without further comment, he nodded gently to his old friend. "Thank you for keeping it," he said, voice low but heavy with meaning. Jeremiah responded with a slow nod. They didn't need to say that this recording would be the perfect link between Riley Sr. and the current generation of officers, nor did they have to emphasize that what they'd just heard would remind Ava of that fateful night, the night when every person in power chose silence. When Isaac left that room, the USB remained on the table like a relic someone had finally dared to open. Outside, the Wilford sky began to rain, but neither of them felt cold anymore. They held the flame, the only thing that could burn what seemed untouchable. Isaac's office was so quiet at the end of the day that the sound of a pen tapping on the old wooden desk was clearly audible. The soft yellow light cast shadows over the documents he was reviewing. He did not look up when he heard the first knock on the door, assuming it was an administrative staff member who forgot something. However, the second knock came louder and more decisive, prompting him to raise his head while keeping his hand on the file. The door opened abruptly. A young man in a police uniform entered without asking or introducing himself. Isaac recognized him as Alan, a patrol officer who joined the team last year and was known to be cautious and quiet. His face was gaunt, eyes showing determination mixed with confusion. Alan closed the door and stood straight, ignoring the empty chair before him. "I can't stay silent any longer." His voice was choked, as if forcing each word to maintain composure. Isaac rested his elbows on the desk, stared at him for a few seconds, then gently asked, "What do you know?" Alan did not answer immediately. He zipped up his jacket, pulled out a thin file, and placed it on the desk. The pages were wrinkled, and some corners were folded. Isaac saw a familiar title, Wilford Park Incident Report, Preliminary. "This is the draft I wrote," Alan said, placing his hand on the document, "before they edited it." Isaac flipped through several pages, his eyes scanning descriptions like physical impact, uncontrolled stress escalation, and Officer Riley's excessive reaction to a minor. These phrases were missing from the official report Isaac had read. Alan continued with a clearer voice, recounting that days after the park incident, he was summoned to Lieutenant Becker's office. A prepared report lay on the desk, not written by him. The lieutenant said briefly, "You need to sign to confirm your witness statement." When Alan hesitated, he added, "This is how the system self-corrects." Don't make yourself the one who gets pushed out. Alan signed. He convinced himself that silence ensured job stability, believing he was too inexperienced to intervene. But when the video of Riley's slap was aired on an independent channel and the boy Elijah was suspended from school, Alan could not sleep. He tormented himself, rereading his original report before locking it away. If the system treats children like this, what remains of justice? Alan asked, without waiting for an answer. Isaac leaned forward slightly. What will you do? Alan looked directly into his eyes. I'm ready to testify. If I keep hiding, I'm just part of this system. Isaac nodded, without saying thank you or encouragement. He pulled the file toward himself, gently arranging the pages as if restoring distorted truth. The atmosphere became heavy, but felt like a fire quietly igniting. Alan sat down. Their fight now included someone stepping out of the shadows. Isaac did not escort Alan out immediately. Instead, he brewed 2 cups of coffee, placing one before the young officer, saying, "Sit down. You need to understand what you are about to face." Alan sat, and they remained silent for minutes. The scent of hot coffee mixed with old paper created an atmosphere both friendly and oppressive. It was no longer a conversation between superior and subordinate, but between someone who had paid for truth and one who chose to accept the price. Isaac opened a drawer and took out a classified document outlining internal complaint handling over 5 years. All files concerning Riley ended with, "Resolved internally, no further investigation." He showed the document to Alan, pointing to 3 time entries matching those Alan mentioned in his report. "You are not the only one pressured to rewrite, but you are the first to keep the original." Alan glanced and nodded, hands tightening on his knees. "I thought silence meant I wouldn't get dragged in. But seeing Elijah ostracized at school due to adult rumors made me realize I was on the wrong side." His eyes reddened slightly. "I don't have children, but if I did, I wouldn't want them to live believing mistakes can be hidden by a signature." Isaac took out documents regarding the upcoming hearing, placing them before Alan. Instructions for registering as a voluntary witness, promises to protect informants, and a direct line to federal inspectors. "You're not alone," Isaac said. "But once you step forward, everything in your file will be scrutinized. They will try to prove you incompetent or accuse you of fabricating for personal gain." Alan showed no fear. "I don't need people to believe I'm good. I just want them to know Riley did wrong and someone saw it." At the end, Isaac gave Alan a USB drive. "Copy your original report here. I will send 1 copy to the inspectors, and you keep 1. They exchanged a look, needing no words. The next day, Alan registered as a voluntary witness at the Federal Investigation Office. He disclosed the process of writing, editing, and forced signing of the report. His concise answers reflected careful preparation and courage. He focused on omitted details and altered wording meant to conceal blatant violence. The media were unaware, but higher authorities were reassessing files. Alan's original report and testimony would be key to exposing a system sustained by fear and silence. Isaac understood this, and for the first time in weeks, felt hope. Not for himself, but for the boy slapped in the park, and for people like Alan, who once thought truth was a luxury only fools dared pursue. The basement meeting room of the Westside Veterans Center was silent, like a layer of dust never swept away. The dim fluorescent light barely revealed the faces around the table. Isaac sat at the head, eyes focused as if measuring the depth of each word. Ava entered, clutching an old leather bag under her arm. Jeremiah leaned against the wall, his hands tapping rhythmically, a habit from his former career. Alan arrived last, not in uniform, his coat wrapped tight and his head bowed throughout. "Thank you all for coming, even though I know this isn't easy," Isaac said. No one replied, but each held his gaze steadily. He pulled a worn file from his bag and placed it on the table, slowly turning pages as if revisiting memories. Inside were copies of reports on Elijah's assault, Alan's draft internal report, and additional notes from Jeremiah. Ava placed a voice recorder in the middle of the table. This is the recording of Riley yelling at Elijah just before the slap. I think it's still usable if we handle it right. Her voice was calm, not demanding anything, simply that of someone who had lived too long in silence and now refused to die with it. Alan looked up for the first time. His voice was soft but audible. I have the original report. They forced me to change it, said it was an order from above, but I didn't sign it. I only submitted the edited version. I kept the real one. He pulled a sealed envelope from inside his coat, his hand trembling noticeably as he handed it to Isaac. Jeremiah glanced, then nodded. You're not the first to be asked to do that. I refused once and was reassigned to a border traffic post, then forced to retire early. This system doesn't want the right people. It wants those who know how to bow. Isaac silently flipped through the pages in the envelope and stopped at handwritten notes by Alan. Phrases crossed out in red like wounds on a conscience. Did not instigate trouble. Did not resist. Was assaulted in front of witnesses. He looked up at the three. If we release all of this at once, we'll force them to respond. Ava nodded. But at the right time, the right way, otherwise they'll twist it back on us, say we're fabricating or disrupting order. Isaac took a deep breath, eyes resting on his hand placed on the table. I'm no longer inside the system, but I know how it works. It uses procedures, language, and regulations to bend the truth. This time we must choose a moment so they can't raise barriers. Jeremiah crossed his arms, eyes fixed. And we won't speak alone. Alan looked up, no longer bowing his head for the first time. Ava pressed her lips, eyes like someone who had waited a lifetime for this moment. Silence held the room a moment longer, but it was no longer silence born of fear. It was the silence of consensus. Outside, the wind blew fiercely through an open window. Inside, 4 people quietly prepared a battlefield the system never anticipated. The next morning, the group reconvened, no longer tentative. On the worn wooden table lay 3 files, one about Elijah, another containing data related to Riley Sr. and Isaac's father's death, and the last with evidence of internal manipulation by Harold Crane. Isaac placed his hand on each file as if marking every strike that would soon stab back at the system he once defended. We can't send these to mainstream media. They will filter, distort, or be blocked by the city council, Isaac said, eyes scanning Ava before settling on Alan. I need a channel with credibility that won't cave to pressure. Ava nodded. I know an independent investigative group in D.C. They exposed a federal police corruption case last year. They don't take government funding and aren't controlled in content. She laid a business card on the table. Civil Pulse Project. Jeremiah opened his own file, pulling out a USB wrapped in leather. I encrypted all data ever deleted. There are reports from over 4 internal investigations related to Riley, 3 suspended without reason. Alan spoke quickly, as if afraid to change his mind if he stayed silent. I'll speak out, but only when this evidence is public. I don't want to be targeted before the hearings. His eyes turned to Ava, voice lowering. I have a wife and a young child. Isaac didn't answer immediately. He opened his laptop and compiled the documents into 3 separate packages, one for Elijah's case, one for Riley Sr.'s past and his father's death, and the last, the connection, where Harold Crane appeared as the link spanning 2 generations, a legacy of power. We will release all data simultaneously. Each person keeps a copy in case someone is monitored or loses contact. He looked up evenly. No partial releases. We release everything. One strike. Ava looked at Isaac. Do you think, will we be retaliated against? Isaac smirked slightly. It's no longer an if. It's a when, Jeremiah said without looking away from the screen. Then we must strike before they can react. They agreed on Monday morning, the day of the city council's regular press briefing, when all departments and media are present. Isaac would deliver hard copies to a civil rights group. Ava would send encrypted data to independent press channels. Jeremiah would coordinate security connections. Alan would prepare video testimony to be released last if everything exploded. This is not a fight for applause, Isaac said. We don't need cheers. We need the truth to be exposed in a way the entire system cannot deny. No one spoke further. They just nodded, slowly, quietly, but with certainty. That night, Isaac sat alone. In his hands was a photo of Elijah from kindergarten, his shirt still stained with milk, eyes bright. He wasn't thinking of legal orders. He was thinking of a child who had been slapped only because he knew how to read, think, and smile. Jeremiah left the print shop with slow but steady steps. In his hands was a carefully bound stack of documents, backed up from an old file previously deleted for technical reasons. The early morning wind blew gently through the street, fluttering the edges of his coat. The parking lot had only a few cars left. His old sedan sat near the end, its dull brown reflection visible under the streetlights. As Jeremiah approached, he stopped abruptly. The entire windshield was shattered into fragments. Small pieces still fell with a faint clatter from the bent metal frame. On the hood, a message was scratched by a sharp object, slanting but clear, "Turn back while you still can." He neither shouted nor called the police. His eyes lingered for a few seconds on the message, then quietly opened the passenger door, placed the documents on the seat, and checked each sheet inside. Nothing was missing. They had not yet taken the data. They were only warning. When he arrived home, it was already dark. On the sidewalk, a strange car was parked close to the gate, its headlights still on, the occupant inside keeping his eyes fixed on his house. Jeremiah stood there for nearly a minute without moving. As he pulled out his phone, the car suddenly sped away, leaving a thin smoke trail in the cold air. Not far from there, Ava was sitting in the kitchen brewing tea when she heard a soft noise outside the porch. Opening the door, she found an unmarked envelope hooked onto the doorknob. No postal stamp, no sender's address. Inside was a faded old newspaper. The headline circled in fluorescent ink: "Mrs. Ava's husband dies after police collision. No one prosecuted." Along with it was a small note, typed, "You show your back to people, but are you sure what you want them to see?" Ava called no one. She carefully folded the newspaper, placed it together with the note into a document box, and locked it with an old combination lock. Her breath trembled lightly. For the first time in many years, her hands shook as well. The next morning, she went directly to the meeting place with Isaac. It was still the basement of the West Side building, with old lights and a characteristic damp smell. Without much talk, she placed the envelope on the table, eyes locked on him. "They have started," she said softly, "and they don't need to be noisy." Isaac opened the letter, scanned it. Expression remained unchanged. He closed the box, set it aside, then poured tea for both of them. The air between them carried no scent of fear, only determination. At the end of the meeting, Jeremiah entered, his coat covered in dust, face tense but eyes sharp. He recounted everything evenly, as if reading a report. Isaac said nothing, took a blank sheet of paper, wrote one line, then passed it for both to see. "We do not retreat, but we must break everything down now." All three nodded, like three power cables waiting to connect to a fuse. Isaac was sitting alone in his office when the phone rang. The screen showed no name, only a strange number. He looked at it for a few seconds before answering with a low, brief voice. "I'm listening." The other side was silent for a few seconds. Then a man's voice, hoarse, trying to sound calm. "I'm calling to offer advice, not a threat." The voice bore no regional accent, suppressed by professional caution. Isaac did not respond. The man continued, "I know you are a man of law, and you are doing what you believe is right. But right is not always worth it." Still no answer. The voice shortened the distance. "Your son is in 7th grade. This morning he took the bus to school, but are you sure today's driver is a usual one?" Isaac stood, eyes toward the window. Elijah's school was less than 2 blocks away, yet it suddenly seemed hundreds of miles farther. He kept a calm tone. "What do you want? I told you to stop, right now. Take your hands off that damn file and let the system work itself out. You stay silent, your son stays safe. Everything else you can keep. Honor, memories, position, all of it, as long as you know when to stop." The call ended before Isaac could reply. Only cold silence remained. He sat down, still holding the phone. His heartbeat did not race. but his eyes had changed. Something had awakened, not fear, but a limit crossed. He immediately sent the recording to Jeremiah and Alan through a secure channel, attaching a short message. Activate backup plan if I lose contact for 48 hours. Right after, he entered Elijah's room. The boy was studying, wearing headphones, nodding slightly to background music. Isaac said nothing. He just stood and watched his son for a long time, as if memorizing every expression and subtle gesture. That entire night, Isaac did not sleep. He printed the entire data into hard copies, carefully wrapped in 3 separate folders, divided into 3 parts. One part was sent to Ava, one given to Jeremiah for safe storage in a personal safe deposit box. The last part he kept with him, locked in the car trunk like an unspoken vow. The next noon, Alan called with a report. Unauthorized access to the backup server occurred just as you sent the recording. He managed to block it, but the signs showed the internal system was no longer secure. Jeremiah proposed splitting the files into many parts, encrypting by layers, and distributing across smaller platforms instead of one central point. Isaac agreed. The 3 arranged to meet at a small cafe near the ferry pier. Before leaving, Isaac left a note stuck behind his bookshelf at home, where Elijah often hid his scribbled drawings. It contained only one line: "Dad is doing this so you won't have to live in a world where a child is slapped just for knowing how to smile." The building looked like a long-abandoned business, its front coated with faded white paint, windows covered with frosted paper hiding the interior. Isaac knocked 3 times lightly, exactly as instructed. A man opened the door, checked his ID badge, and then led him down a narrow corridor to a small room at the end. No logo, no sign, yet everything inside was neat, clean, and so quiet that only the air conditioner hummed. 5 people sat around a round wooden table. Among them was a woman with short hair, bright eyes, and a voice calm enough to silence the room. She introduced herself as Riley, in charge of investigative content at the Civil Pulse Project. Isaac opened the fabric bag he carried, taking out 3 classified and separately wrapped file sets. He placed each on the table without explanation. The assault on Elijah, internal documents tampered with, and a chain of data concerning his father's death nearly 3 decades ago. Included were sworn statements from Jeremiah and Alan, all encrypted with matching hard copies. Riley carefully opened each file, showing no expression as she reviewed them. He skimmed through notes, played the first audio recording, and put on headphones. Minutes later, she looked up at Isaac, not with skepticism, but with a cold, professional gaze, as if recognizing she faced something beyond ordinary news. "You know, this is not just a case of law enforcement violence. It is a structure, a pattern repeated, maintained, and systematically protected. If this is all true, we are sitting on a minefield." Riley's voice remained steady, but editors around her started paying closer attention, taking meticulous notes. Isaac nodded. "I don't need sensationalism. I need to reveal the truth, but correctly, in the right order. If it's mishandled, they will distort the motive and turn me into a spokesperson for a personal power conflict." Riley proposed clearly. She wanted to divide the entire dataset into a layered investigative series, each focusing on a hidden angle, from Riley's personal misconduct to the city council's shielding system, ending with the string of deaths buried in the past. This approach would avoid distorting the message and sustain public interest rather than a brief flare and then fade. However, she demanded further verification of the identities and motives of everyone involved in the files. Without clear cross-checking, they could be countersued, slandered, or dismissed under the pretext of lack of objectivity. Isaac understood. The system does not fall by data alone. It falls when those who bring data dare to stand with it. He hesitated not, but knew he could not be the only one. Before leaving the office, he left an original, signed and sealed hard copy. Riley took it, eyes lingering a few seconds on the first headline, "Starting from the slap." Isaac spoke slowly, then turned to leave. "If I disappear, start with the day Elijah was beaten. Everything that follows is just a consequence. Ava opened the door slowly when she heard the first knock. Outside stood Isaac, holding a thin envelope, his face more serious than before. She did not ask why, but turned to pour tea, as if expecting what was coming. The small apartment was filled with books and papers, everything tidy, in the habit of a person who had lived alone for many years. On the table was an old recorder and a worn notebook with a folded corner, the first page handwritten, "If I die before the truth is spoken, let my voice speak for me." Isaac sat opposite her. He opened the envelope and took out the witness identity confirmation requested by Civil Pulse. They needed someone brave enough to use their real name, show their real face, and speak the truth. To begin the first series, not everyone has the patience to listen to data, but they will listen to a voice old enough not to fear losing anything anymore, Isaac said softly. Ava was silent, resting on the teacup. She stared out the window for a while, then returned, her gaze unwavering. "Do you know what I thought when my husband died?" she asked. Isaac did not answer. "I thought if I reacted, I would be next to be killed. I thought if I sued, I would be called a dredger of the past. I thought silence was the way to keep his honor. But as years passed, no one kept anything. They didn't even remember who he was." She took out a faded photo from a drawer, showing her and her husband when they were young. He stood upright, wearing a short-sleeved shirt, eyes staring straight into the lens. Behind them was the park, the place where the scuffle leading to his death happened. The photo had once been included in press files but was cropped halfway. Only she remained, standing alone. "This time, I will not let them cut half the frame again," Ava said, pushing the confirmation paper toward Isaac. "They can take my name, my age, even my voice, as long as they don't dare take the truth." Isaac did not hide his emotions. He nodded slowly and heavily, like someone who had just gained agreement from something more sacred than power. He contacted Riley again, sending a scanned copy of the signed paper along with Ava's portrait and personal information she verified herself. The next day, Ava came to the Civil Pulse office. The room was still simple, cameras set at the widest angle, light enough to reveal every wrinkle on her face. Riley sat across, calmly asking each detail, without guiding. "Why did you decide to speak out after all these years?" Ava answered without hesitation, "Because I am old enough now to have no time left to live in cowardice, and because I saw a child beaten in broad daylight, like my husband was beaten in the night. Aren't you afraid of retaliation? I used to be, but then I understood. Silence can kill too. So, at least, let me kill silence once." Riley ended the call after 15 minutes of the interview. No visuals needed, no music added, words like knives were enough. Before leaving, Ava stood, put on an old coat. Riley whispered, "Can we title it, 'The First One No Longer Afraid'?" Ava smiled, "No need. Just let them see I won't bow down." That night, Civil Pulse began producing the opening article, a black and white photo of Ava. A small line below, "I once let them cut half the story, but this time I will tell it all." The article was published in the morning as planned. The headline appeared boldly and succinctly centered on the screen. "The victim is no stranger. He is the son of the chief of police." Below was a photo capturing the moment Riley grabbed Elijah by the collar, his eyes blazing with hostility. Set in the Wilford Park grounds. At the edge of the frame, Ava stood sideways, clutching her handbag tightly, her gaze fixed directly on the boy. Her expression was not one of outrage, but of expectancy, as if the worst had finally come to pass. Civil Pulse did not lead with emotion. The article went straight to the event, quoting recordings, witness statements, and the fact that Riley had been internally accused 3 times. But each case was quietly handled. The most critical line confirmed. Elijah Moore, 12 years old, is the son of Chief of Police Isaac Moore. The article quickly spread across social media. Within less than 2 hours, 3 hashtags rose to the top trending list. Hashtag Justice for Elijah, hashtag Riley Exposed, and hashtag Systemic Cover-Up. People shared images, clips from Ava's interview, alongside excerpts from Riley's old files. The anger needed no call to action. It was already there, requiring only a spark. Major news outlets began to respond. Initially, they shared the original link with neutral captions. But by afternoon, several television stations proactively contacted Civil Pulse for rights to use the footage. Reporters who had previously been silent during past investigations now changed tone, raising questions about transparency within the Wilford Police's internal disciplinary system. A short editorial in the Times stated clearly, "If the chief's own son can be slapped in the park like a criminal, what hope do the nameless have when their right to life is suppressed?" Inside the department, reactions split sharply. Some young officers posted brief messages on social media without naming Riley but featuring Elijah's image and the phrase, "No one deserves to be hit just for existing." Meanwhile, many remained absolutely silent. They deleted old posts defending Riley, withdrew from internal chat groups, or cited avoiding misstatements to refuse press inquiry. A few intermediaries began to turn away. A regional captain, once considered a close ally of Crane, canceled a regular meeting and withdrew from a community event featuring city representatives. No one spoke it aloud, but all understood. The tide had turned. A shortened clip of Ava's interview circulated separately, showing her looking directly into the camera with an even tone. "A child was beaten, and people only care whose child he is. I want to know, if he were anonymous, who would stand up?" Those words echoed in hundreds of posts, shared like a manifesto. Numerous civil rights organizations reposted the full interview with a call to action. Do not let the system choose who is protected. Hold it accountable for all. Inside Wilford Police Headquarters, Isaac sat facing the internal council in a closed meeting. No press, no cameras. Those who once kept their distance now looked at him with a different gaze, hesitant and wary. He neither defended nor denied anything. When asked for an official response, Isaac said simply, clearly, with no need for elaboration, "I did not name myself. This system did." He left the meeting immediately without waiting for a conclusion. On his way home, he passed a group of students holding banners at a busy intersection. "If Elijah is my son, I would stand up too." At City Hall, phones began ringing incessantly. The city's communications staff sifted through emails requesting responses, with hundreds of mentions of Riley, Elijah, and Isaac flooding social media every minute. The atmosphere in the senior officials' meeting room thickened like dense fog. Everyone knew the situation was slipping out of control. Harold Crane sat at the head of the table, hand never leaving his expensive fountain pen, eyes closed, not from fatigue but weighing a sacrificial plan. This time, the one to be brought down was the person who had been most uncooperative with him. The public began taking to the streets. In Wilford Central Square, people carried banners, slogans, and megaphones all centered on the message. Riley's conduct cannot be covered up, and Isaac's suspension is a gag on justice. Student groups occupied Wilford University's courtyard, loudly reading sections of the report Allen had submitted, along with a list of officials who approved documents containing violations. Elijah's image appeared on electronic billboards, not permitted by the city but paid for by some businesses to send a clear message. It was time for the system to face consequences. Crane did not wait any longer. He convened an internal meeting with advisors, media, and legal staff. In the meeting, he made a brief demand, allowing no debate. Isaac Moore must resign to protect the city's stability. A few responded lightly, mentioning the investigation was ongoing, but Crane dismissed these concerns, emphasizing the situation could not escalate further. The resignation order was not sent in writing, but conveyed directly to Isaac in a confidential call. The caller was a close advisor of Crane, whom Isaac had known well for many years. Isaac did not answer immediately. He hung up, sitting alone in the old office, the light from the window shining on the unopened file box still inside the building. Resigning was not something he had ever considered, but now silence was the only thing he kept in a battle that had dragged his son into the whirlpool of hatred and reputation. Outside, news outlets continued intensifying coverage. Some conservative sites began releasing articles attacking Isaac, focusing on old cases from his tenure handling internal police misconduct. Though those cases had been resolved, In times of public unrest, any weakness could be exploited. Those once standing on the fence were forced to pick sides. The federal inspectorate announced it would hold a public hearing within 3 days. They confirmed summoning Riley, Crane, and Isaac to testify directly before the committee. This news further heated the situation. Public opinion was divided, this time into two extremes. One side demanding that Isaac reveal the whole truth publicly, the other calling for his withdrawal to avoid prolonging the political crisis. In a brief late-afternoon press conference, the city spokesperson read a message from Crane's office. Expression unchanged. Wilford City is going through a sensitive period. We call on all parties to remain calm, respect procedures, and cooperate with investigators. All personnel decisions will be made in the common interest. The last sentence was like a cold cut. Though no one spoke it plainly, everyone understood Isaac was being pushed to his breaking point. At home, Elijah quietly folded the newspaper showing his father being asked to step down. He did not ask questions or seek explanations. He only knew that in this world, sometimes doing right must be paid for like a crime. And when the truth begins to be heard, the first thing people do is demand that those daring to speak be silent. The morning at the Wilford Police Department was strangely dull. No sirens, no ringing phones, not even the faint laughter from the technical team. The third-floor hallway, where the chief of police's office was located, carried a heavy atmosphere, as if everyone anticipated what was about to happen, merely waiting for the key person to step out. On Isaac Moore's desk lay a thick envelope sealed in red, neatly printed, with the words, "Confidential, Internal Affairs." Below, Harold Crane's firm signature faintly showed through the translucent paper. In the emergency meeting room, the HR director stood up. His voice was steady like a machine, emotionless, expressionless. Chief of Police, Isaac Moore, will be temporarily suspended for violating confidentiality procedures during the internal investigation. The order takes effect immediately. All system access privileges will be frozen. The approving signature belonged to Oversight Commissioner Harold Crane. The red stamp pressed on the face of justice was like a stroke, wiping out the authority of the man who had protected this city for 8 years. There was no applause or objection in the room. Some officers turned their faces away, some looked down at documents pretending to read, a few blinked lightly, not from surprise but relief. They were the ones who had long awaited this day. Others neither knew whether to feel sadness or relief, only a sharp ache in their chests. Isaac sat still, like a rock in the storm. He neither nodded nor shook his head. When the session ended, he quietly stood up, opened a drawer, took out a small cardboard Bodex and began placing his personal belongings inside. An old pen, a photo with Elijah when the boy received a scholarship in 4th grade, a black leather notebook that had accompanied him through 3 department chiefs. Not hurried, not regretful. When only his silver badge remained, he paused longer, then placed it on the desk without a sound. Outside, the police PR office had prepared a press release for the media. The bold headline read, "Wilford Police Department does not tolerate any procedural violations, even if committed by the highest-ranking officer." The content emphasized that Isaac Moore's actions might affect the fairness of the investigation and undermine internal trust. The wording was cold, stripped of context, ignoring merits, targeting exactly who needed to be removed. The news spread like lightning. Most regional TV channels simultaneously reported, "Wilford Police Chief, suspended," showing Isaac leaving the office carrying a box, face expressionless. Some news outlets began questioning, is this the consequence of his disclosure of documents related to Riley's case? Others interviewed city officials who gave evasive answers. All personnel must comply with procedures without exception. On social media, public opinion is split clearly. One side wrote, "Breaking the rules is unacceptable, even if he had reason." The other retorted, "The only person brave enough to expose the system is silenced. Wilford is removing the good under the guise of compliance." Posts supporting Isaac garnered tens of thousands of shares. A photo of him placing his badge on the desk circulated with the caption, "When one remains silent to the end, that is when the whole system trembles." No one knew what Isaac was thinking, yet even after being removed from the top position, he offered no explanation, no correction, no justification. Silence became his final weapon, and also how he preserved his dignity before the real battle began. Elijah sat on a bench in front of Wilford Police Headquarters, leaning against his backpack, eyes staring fixedly at the entrance. He had arrived early, didn't ask anyone, and didn't announce himself. The gatekeeper recognized the boy but dared not ask why. The name Elijah Moore was no longer unfamiliar, but it was only mentioned with pitying looks or slight headshakes as if avoiding speaking of something too significant. A gentle breeze blew his cap off his lap onto the ground. Elijah did not pick it up. When the glass doors opened, his father stepped out. Isaac held a small box containing only a few personal items. No one accompanied him. No officers saw him off. He walked slowly, upright, but each step seemed to carry the weight of a collapsing system. Elijah stood, gripping the strap of his backpack so tightly it turned white. Isaac stopped upon seeing his son waiting. They looked at each other silently for a few seconds. Elijah's eyes widened slightly, not from surprise, but from not knowing how to begin the questions. Isaac placed the box down, looked at his son, and gave a faint smile. That smile contained no joy. It bore the color of helplessness, a chilling calm when one has nothing left but must still stand tall. "So they fired you, Dad?" Elijah whispered, eyes still locked on his father's face. Isaac nodded, no explanation, no justification. His eyes were red but not teary. Elijah tried to stay composed, lips pressed tight, shoulders trembling slightly. Then suddenly, as if he could no longer bear it, he turned away, wiped his eyes, but tears still ran down his cheeks. He bit his lip, voice choking. "Have they really won, Dad?" Isaac did not answer immediately. He bent down, picked up the cap from the ground, dusted it lightly, and placed it on his son's head. One hand rested on Elijah's shoulder, squeezing firmly. The silence between father and son was like a sigh lasting years. Then Isaac quietly said, "No one wins. Only those who don't give up make it to the end." Elijah nodded softly, but no longer hid his feelings. The bitter grief was no longer something to keep secret. He no longer needed to play the strong role as before. Right in the lobby of the headquarters, where his father had daily entered as the last guardian of the city's justice, was where he deeply understood loss. Not loss of rank, not loss of power, but the feeling of having one's voice taken, being silenced amid a silent crowd. Inside the building, several eyes from upper-floor windows watched. No one spoke or greeted, but one of them was someone who had sworn allegiance under Isaac, now keeping silent to keep their seat. Elijah looked up as if fully aware of that. His gaze sharpened, no longer wet. Something in Elijah had just awakened, not from lessons or books, but from witnessing the strongest man in his life being pushed out of a place that should have belonged to him. Isaac lifted the box, gestured for his son to follow. Father and son left the steps, crossed the stone courtyard, and walked out onto the street. A nearby reporter silently raised a camera, capturing the moment. Elijah tightened his backpack strap while turning back to look. The photo was posted online hours later with Elijah's exact words when asked about his feelings. "I don't cry because my father failed. I cry because justice has no home." The phrase spread rapidly. Some called it a declaration. Some called it an indictment. But to Elijah, it was simply the first truth he learned in life. Not from books. Immediately after Isaac Moore was suspended, Ava knew time was running out. She sat in the small kitchen, reopening an old mailbox locked for years, pulling out a velvet-covered audio recorder. It contained a conversation between her husband and Riley Sr., recorded nearly 3 decades ago, weeks before he died during a mysterious pursuit. Ava had brought this tape to many places, but no one dared touch it. Now, after witnessing Isaac's son humiliated and Isaac himself removed from the system, she understood this was the only and final moment. She contacted an independent television station that had once interviewed her in a report about families who lost loved ones to abuse of power. The recording was sent with a handwritten letter saying, "They have forgotten us for too long. I only need someone to listen once more." When the tape was checked and verified, The editorial team fell silent. The voice on the recording was clearly Riley Sr., cold and direct, without evasion. If that kind survives, sooner or later it will challenge us. Handling it quickly is good for the city. What seemed a casual phrase, when placed in context, the speaker, a senior officer, and the listener, a victim who died shortly after, became something entirely different. The phrase, handling it quickly, was no longer official protocol, but evidence. The press described the statement in one word: cruel. Independent reporters immediately launched verification, checking voice matches and cross-referencing service records. Everything matched perfectly. Initially, major newspapers hesitated, but as views surged and angry comments flooded social media, they were forced to publish articles, albeit cautiously using the word suspected. Meanwhile, another figure emerged from the shadows. Ava, a young officer who had served under Riley, approached Ava's group. He carried an old file with folded, stained edges, a copy of an internal report from last year, where the description of Riley's uncontrolled violence was crossed out and replaced with preventive intervention following safety procedures. That section bore Alan's signature, but alongside was a handwritten note clearly not his. Alan recounted that after submitting the initial report, he was called to a superior's office and asked to sign a revised, pre-prepared version. He objected, but was threatened with transfer to an administrative unit, and warned his pension might be reconsidered if he caused internal trouble. At that time, he bowed his head and signed. But after Elijah stood in front of the precinct, clutching his backpack strap and struggling to hold back tears, Alan knew he could no longer remain silent. I cannot let a child bear the consequences of adults' cowardice anymore. Ava listened to Alan, her eyes without blame, only a nod acknowledging that sometimes rising late is better than never rising at all. Hours later, they appeared together on a live social media broadcast. Ava wore black and spoke slowly, each word like a nail driven into the table. Alan stood beside her, straight-backed, eyes unflinching. They told no personal stories, shed no tears, and did not plead innocence. They presented documents, recordings, and original reports, clearly without raising their voices or casting blame. The program lasted less than 20 minutes, but attracted millions of views that night. No one took their eyes off the screen. The story was no longer just about a family, a suspended officer, or a slapped child. It was a warning to a system too accustomed to pushing truth to the sidelines. Now, the flood had begun. Less than a day after Ava and Alan's broadcast, every social media platform was flooded with a single hashtag: Justice for Elijah. Initially, a few individuals shared the video, followed by community groups, independent journalists, and finally a slew of major news sites that had once been silent or neutral. Under every post were thousands of comments, shares, and questions demanding answers. Who protected Riley? Who forced Alan to alter the report? Who ignored Ava's husband's death for nearly 30 years? National TV stations joined not out of responsibility, but because the public outrage had spiraled beyond control. Every new article was fuel on a fire never before quenched. Veteran journalists previously forced out of Wilford for reporting on racial discrimination in policing returned, with audiences 10 and 100 times larger. A series titled They Knew and Stayed Silent ran continuously for 3 days, each article quoting internal files Alan provided and showing images of Elijah standing in the police courtyard with tear-rilled eyes. Pressure spread to local legislators. Civil organizations jointly demanded a state-level hearing to review the entire complaint handling system in law enforcement. Prominent lawyers from major cities volunteered to offer free legal aid to any witnesses threatened or coerced into silence. A law student group launched a website compiling all details with relationship charts, file links, and maps of hidden power. Millions of visits crashed servers, forcing an expansion within 12 hours. Inside government agencies, cracks appeared. Some mid-level officers sent anonymous letters to newsrooms, attaching internal emails ordering soft handling of cases involving black residents to protect the city's image. A memo titled "Image Control of the Unit Under All Circumstances" leaked, bearing Harold Crane's approval signature. Everything was coming to light, but amid the storm, Isaac remained silent. He did not appear in any videos, declined interviews, and never posted on social media. Attempts to contact him were refused. People began calling him the silent keeper of the flame. This silence, in these circumstances, was no longer a sign of retreat, but a pressure forcing all involved to tread carefully. Meanwhile, Elijah gradually became a symbol of a new generation. His image, standing beside his father with resolute eyes, was printed on T-shirts, posters, and street art. A street artist in a neighboring city painted a large mural on an administrative building, depicting Elijah standing tall amid a rain of internal files falling around him. Beneath the phrase, "When a child stands up, the entire system must bow," the mural spread as a wordless manifesto. The wave climaxed when a clip from Ava and Alan's live stream was used as the opening segment of a national news broadcast. Ava looked straight into the camera, speaking clearly and slowly, without trembling. "I do not need anyone to apologize to my husband anymore. I only need them to stop creating more victims." Her words ended in a heavy silence in the studio, followed seconds later by tens of thousands of shares. At that moment, no one questioned whether Elijah deserved justice. The question had shifted to how many other Elijahs remained unseen. The second-floor hall of the state administrative building was packed, despite being arranged for an emergency event. At the front, a long table draped with a white cloth hosted the Federal Oversight Board, sitting upright as if awaiting a trial rather than an internal hearing. On the left were representatives of human rights organizations. On the right, the press, with cameras positioned in every corner. A heavy atmosphere loomed, broken only by the gentle tapping of pens on notebooks and the occasional creak of wooden chairs. Isaac entered, carrying no documents, his face as still as stone. Behind him, Riley was already seated, wearing a fully buttoned white shirt, his expression tense. Crane sat further down the row, eyes fixed on the ceiling, leaning back with an indifferent attitude. When it was his turn, Isaac stood without looking at any paper. He clearly presented the entire case. The camping event at the park, Riley's slap, the department's response, the suspension decision, and the subsequent released data. He made no complaints or subjective accusations. Each point was supported by evidence, timelines, and compared to internal procedures. When mentioning the altered file, he did not look toward Alan or call his name, yet his words were clear enough that no one in the room could pretend not to understand. His final sentence struck like a sharp blade. "I have nothing to gain for myself, but I have a responsibility to reclaim the truth for a child disregarded because of his skin color." A few board members nodded slightly. The chair shifted his gaze to Riley. He stood up with a slight tremor in his voice, claiming he exercised his right to protect his son when he saw him threatened. According to him, Elijah had aggressive behavior and provocative words that offended Nelson. His intervention was to prevent escalation, and he only pushed lightly, not slapped. When asked about the video circulating online, he insisted it was edited and lacked context. Riley looked at the board, adding, "This is a smear campaign intended to damage my reputation for political motives." A few people chuckled softly, but no one spoke out. Isaac remained seated. He requested to speak again and was granted permission. He presented operational system logs showing Riley failed to report the incident within 24 hours as required. He quoted the altered report where descriptions of violent behavior were removed, replaced by phrases indicating proactive prevention. "This is no longer a dispute about facts or words. This is the system's chosen method to protect lies." The board's attention shifted to Crane. The city's chief administrative supervisor sat up straight, his voice hoarse, stating he had only received files from subordinates and had never directly handled the specific case. When questioned about signatures on internal statements, he said it was an administrative process and drafts might have been finalized by legal counsel. An outsider council member asked directly, "Are you aware that Riley was complained against 3 times in 2 years?" Crane replied, "I don't recall clearly. then repeated the familiar refrain that his role was limited to overseeing image and internal communications. The recorders needed no further questions. All evasions were clear. The hearing seemed destined to end there, shrouded in helplessness. The board member stated, "We acknowledge the presentation but need concrete visual evidence at the time of the incident." No one stood to object. Isaac sat down, hands resting on his knees, gaze steady. Riley blinked repeatedly, while Crane stretched as if relieved to end a pointless meeting. The media began packing up, assuming the case was stalled. Then, at the back table, an independent reporter slowly raised a hand and requested permission. "I have just received an unpublished video capturing the entire incident at the park." The room froze as if the air had been cut off. Isaac did not turn, but his gaze tightened like a sharpened blade. The USB was silently handed to the board. The reporter confirmed the footage came from an anonymous witness present at the park that day but never before on the media. The original data's timestamp matched the security camera logs. The board ordered a pause in the hearing to review the content. A large screen lit up in the hall, casting pale blue light on faces once cold but now wavering. The image was clear and steady. The lens was placed at the park's left grassy corner, where sunlight slanted through trees, providing surprising clarity. First appeared children playing, Elijah's laughter audible. Then Riley approached from afar. The wide angle showed him stepping quickly, with no words exchanged, no investigation attempted. Seconds later, the frame shook as Riley grabbed Elijah's collar and leaned close. Everything was undeniable. Elijah's face, pressed near the screen, eyes wide open. Then Riley's hand swung, striking Elijah's right cheek. The slap echoed like a blow to the whole room. Some held their breath, a few exhaled softly. No one looked away or moved. The video continued seconds after the slap, capturing Elijah's trembling face, lips pressed tight, eyes panicked but not breaking down. A slap in broad daylight in a crowded park with no provocation, no reaction from the child, and notably no defensive act. When the footage stopped, the room remained silent with no immediate response. The chair requested the reporter verify the tape's origin. The reporter clearly stated the video was simultaneously sent to 2 independent agencies for authentication. Timestamps and metadata matched with no signs of editing. Another board member asked why the witness only submitted this now. The answer was fear of retaliation. But seeing the distorted narrative, they could no longer remain silent. Riley hung his head, hands twisting, face pale. He no longer argued or defended himself. The man who had denied everything was now undone by his own undeniable act. Crane leaned forward, about to speak, but the board signaled for order. One member asked directly, "So now, who is truly damaging the police's image?" Isaac remained still, hands on knees, eyes fixed on Riley. His gaze was neither angry nor disdainful, but a mature silence that disoriented his opponent. To him, this hearing was no longer about right or wrong, but proving that truth could be delayed but never buried. At the session's end, the board announced it would consider criminal responsibility based on the released video. Independent forensic agencies would be involved immediately. The next debate was postponed, pending official legal confirmation. News spread outside the chamber like wildfire. Media captured board members, rising with heavy expressions, the already cold hearing atmosphere nearly freezing. That very evening, news outlets simultaneously released the breaking story. Headlines flooded major sites. The full video of Riley's slap turns the tide. Public opinion boiled. Articles that once doubted Elijah's account were resurrected. Comments shifted to apologies and calls for legal action. The slap, once dismissed as fake news, became an undeniable symbol of abuse of power. A prominent article closed boldly. Truth needs no defense. It only requires a timely video to shatter the walls of lies built over many years. After the video was released and went viral, Riley almost disappeared from the media. In the early days, he still appeared with his personal lawyer, but gradually he withdrew, refusing to answer any interviews. Reporters camped outside his house for days, without capturing any images except shadows passing by the window. He remained silent, yet the system did not allow him to vanish. When the investigation board reopened the supplemental questioning session, Riley was forced to appear. His face was visibly gaunt, his chin retracted, and his hair greasy at the temples. He was asked about the response procedures during the park incident, but the questions quickly shifted when a board member demanded that Riley clarify the origins of the behavior. His gaze dropped to the edge of the table. He hesitated, then slightly nodded. He began with a short, hoarse, and broken statement that he did not decide everything that day. Some heads lifted. He continued with a clearer voice, explaining that during internal unit training sessions, young officers like him were informally reminded to tighten security in upscale neighborhoods. The phrase repeated often was strange elements, referring to people not residing in the area but frequently present for unclear reason. Those dressed improperly, speaking with different accents, or moving in a way that didn't belong there were listed as groups needing quick handling to avoid trouble. He did not name the direct commander, but described that everyone implicitly understood it was an order from higher-ups. The phrase most frequently mentioned in meetings was just, "Make it neat, don't leave any records." He gave examples of previous cases handled in this way, including unjustified body searches, expulsions from neighborhoods for temporary safety reasons, and some assaults recorded as resisting inspection. One of the names he mentioned was the late Riley Sr., his father, who once had significant influence in the field. He said his father taught him how to avoid writing complete reports and how to use terminology to legalize violent acts. Once, his father bluntly said, "Keeping this area clean is keeping your whole career safe." That was the first lesson he learned after graduation. The entire room fell silent for several minutes. The board requested verification of internal records, but Riley added a detail that thickened the atmosphere. He was ordered not to allow strange black individuals prolonged contact with native residents. The reason noted in the manual was to prevent cultural conflicts leading to civil disturbances. He said he never saw this recorded in any official documents, but that it was an unwritten rule everyone understood. A board member commented that if Riley's words were true, the problem was no longer individual, but a set of unwritten principles governing all behavior. A human rights organization representative demanded the establishment of a special investigation into the oral orders within the Wilford police force and the retrieval of all training content from the past decade. The media immediately caught on. News outlets ran headlines, "Riley exposes secret order, harsh treatment of strange elements." Some former officers serving in Wilford confirmed having heard similar phrases, but lacked evidence to speak out at the time. One bluntly said in an interview, "If Riley is guilty, there's an entire system behind him convincing him he's innocent." Riley was removed from the hearing as a temporarily cooperating witness, awaiting an independent criminal investigation. No one escorted him out of the building. Security personnel avoided looking at him, as if even guarding a soon-to-be exposed person made them feel dirty. Isaac sat in the adjacent waiting room, not attending that questioning session, but as he stepped into the hallway, he paused to watch Riley's shadow disappear into the elevator. No words, no insulting glances. His gaze was the only thing Riley could not bear, because it needed no words. The question seemingly dropped into the tense air and hit the core absolutely. A board member placed his hand on the table, looked Harold Crane straight in the eye, and slowly read each word. "How much do you know about the death of Riley Sr. and the 1993 incident involving a man named Charles Graves?" No one in the room moved. Crane hesitated, then gave a slight smile as if facing an old joke, but the board's eyes did not leave him. No one laughed, and at that moment, all remaining noise in the room vanished. Crane adjusted his tie, sat upright, and spoke, evenly, so that he no longer remembered details of a case over 30 years old, that he had only been a district legal advisor then, not directly involved in investigation or administrative decisions. According to him, all related documents had been stored and handled per procedure, decisions made based on police reports without personal interference. A federal investigator interrupted. placing a blurry photocopy on the table marked in red at the bottom. It was a 1993 internal memo, underlining internal handling, avoid media spread. The handwriting was verified as Crane's. When asked for an explanation, he claimed it was a common administrative phrase at the time, not reflecting an intent to conceal or cover up any wrongdoing. An outside congresswoman stood, her gaze steely. She asked a legal advisor not directly involved in the investigation why sign the final comprehensive report with the note, "Content agreed." Crane appeared flustered, mentioning possible lax office decentralization or being asked to sign administratively. The vaguer the answer, the heavier the pressure in the room. Another blow came from an independent investigative journalist. She informed the board that in 1993, a sum of $10,000 under community funding was transferred to a fund directly linked to Crane, with the source connected to a company in which Riley Sr. held minority shares. When asked to explain, Crane denied all, claiming no knowledge of that connection and stating he never received financial benefits from law enforcement agencies. The board remained silent, but their expressions changed. Their silence was no longer respect, but to observe how a man once at the peak of power stumbled over his words. A human rights representative placed a hand on a thick file and said softly, "We reviewed 30 cases you signed off with the note internal handling. 8 showed signs of conflict of interest. That number's too high to be a coincidence." Crane began to lose patience. He said he was being made a scapegoat for a system flawed by many, and that he could not remember every detail after 3 decades of service. But that statement no longer worked. Sympathy had run out. Caution turned into surveillance. At the end of the questioning, the board officially requested that Crane's supervisory legal duties be suspended, reopening all case files from 1990 onward related to him. An independent criminal investigation would commence. Media captured his image rising, eyes cast down. No one approached or patted his shoulder. As he exited the main hallway, he met Av, the woman who quietly recorded audio, who lost her husband because of a system he was part of. She said nothing, only looked at him with eyes long dried of tears. Crane turned away, avoiding her gaze, because for the first time in his administrative life, he understood what a wordless look meant. It was heavier than any indictment he had ever signed. The morning began with a brief announcement posted on the official city office website. The simple statement was so stark that many suspected a hoax. Harold Crane officially submitted his resignation. There was no press conference, no statements, no further explanation. Only his handwritten signature and a red stamp below, timed to coincide with the release of the suppressed 1993 documents. The media frenzy ignited instantly. Major news outlets shifted from covering the hearings to analyzing the power dynamics behind the scenes. Publications that usually avoided direct confrontation now ran explosive headlines, including the most shared article titled, "The Last Loser Leaves the Chessboard." Images of Crane, once considered the silent architect of the system, appeared across all news channels, accompanied by a widely circulated caption, "When there is nothing left to deny, people choose silence." That same day, the federal prosecutor's office announced the opening of a criminal investigation into a series of law enforcement officials who had held key roles in Wilford over the past 30 years. The preliminary list included figures who had signed off on internal handling records suspected to be forged, ranging from former heads of human resources to the leader of the Internal Investigations Unit a decade ago. Many names previously obscure in the altered files have now become central subjects of the expanded inquiry. Initial charges outlined in the indictment included forging internal documents, abusing public office, covering up violence within the police force, and manipulating inspection conclusions. Several key individuals who had worked alongside Riley were urgently summoned for testimony. Among them were at least 2 former deputy administrative supervisors, believed to be the link between verbal orders and official paperwork. Riley was no longer outside the legal vortex. Following the release of the video and his admission to physical actions driven by covert orders, He lost all protection. His original defense lawyer requested to withdraw due to ethical conflicts. A court-appointed attorney took over and announced Riley would be prosecuted on charges including assault on a minor, abuse of power, obstruction of investigation, and providing false information in official records. The preliminary trial was scheduled to open within 2 weeks. The system, once tightly held by Crane, began fracturing at every link. Internal documents dating back to Riley Sr.'s era were ordered reopened to investigate criminal accountability for incidents previously ruled as operational accidents. A dedicated task force was formed to review all complaints dismissed over the past decade, reporting directly to the Federal Inspector's Office. The media described this as one of the largest legal upheavals in the state's last 20 years, surpassing previous federal lawsuits related to racial discrimination. Evening broadcasts devoted full coverage to tracking every development of the investigation. Every act of evasion now counted as evidence. Every past silence was deemed complicity. A single line appeared on national news screens. No introduction, no explanation, no one is above the truth. In that moment, every chair once considered untouchable faced a very human reckoning, the consequence of actions and the moment they were exposed. And once set in motion, the wheel of justice would not stop halfway. While the media focused on the list of senior officials facing criminal investigation, a quieter yet equally significant development unfolded inside the Wilford Police Department. In a closed meeting room, the acting police chief summoned all unit commanders to announce an unprecedented move: the establishment of an independent reform task force coordinated externally, aimed at overhauling the entire operational and internal handling system. This announcement came without fanfare or empty promises. It was delivered amid a heavy atmosphere following numerous hearings and exposed files. The list of departments to be audited was immediately published, including units suspected of document manipulation, from legal affairs to human resources. The acting chief declared clearly, "There will be no place for anyone who once believed power was a shield." Another surprising decision was inviting Jeremiah Knox back to the department, this time as a reform advisor. The man once forced to leave for daring to expose superiors was welcomed back, not with flowers or apologies, but with an official seat at the table. The news spread quickly, accompanied by an image of Jeremiah entering headquarters wearing his old dark brown coat, eyes quiet but resolute. On social media, people shared that moment with the caption, "The man who left to speak the truth returns to clean up the lies he saw long ago." The Reform Task Force quickly formed, including representatives from the Department of Justice, human rights watchdogs, a data analysis team, and 3 independent advisors, Jeremiah being the most prominent face. He spoke little, focusing on reviewing processes previously exploited to legitimize violations. Whenever encountering a record marked "handled internally," he asked a single question: internally who? The first approved proposals included completely ending the one-sided report approval system. Instead, every disciplinary document must be stored in parallel at 3 independent bodies: the Federal Inspectorate, the Civilian Oversight Agency, and a digitally encrypted archival unit. An open information platform was also developed where any complaint pending longer than 48 hours would automatically be publicly displayed. During retraining sessions, Jeremiah avoided theoretical lectures. He required officers to read aloud the names of those whose complaints had been dismissed, forcing them to see that behind every file was a real person. Many officers looked up at one another for the first time, as familiar names evoked memories they had chosen to forget. Reactions within the force were mixed. Some veteran officers resigned early, deeming the approach an insult to their professional experience. However, many others spoke out for the first time. "I'm not leaving because I want to stay and prove I'm a cop, not a guard for wrongdoing." The division began forming, not by seniority, but by awareness and courage to confront the past. The day after the first meeting, Jeremiah was invited to speak in the main hall. Standing before hundreds of old and new colleagues, hands empty, gaze direct, voice steady and brief, He said, "I didn't come back to be forgiven. I came back to help this place deserve a chance to start over." The hall fell silent. There was no applause, only quiet acknowledgement that something was truly changing. And this time, no one could turn away. Elijah sat at his desk, the late afternoon light filtering through the foggy window streaked with raindrops. His laptop was open, but he had only typed the first line: "I was beaten for smiling, and they did not know who my father was." It was not meant to evoke pity, nor was it a reproach. It was the first truth Elijah chose to begin his story, unembellished and unsparing. He recounted the camping trip as if it had happened just yesterday, a small joke, an extreme reaction, and a slap that could not be erased. Elijah focused not on the blow itself, but on the moments after, the sudden silence, the stunned gazes of bystanders, and the suffocating quiet of the crowd. In his essay, he did not paint himself as a victim, but as someone standing between two worlds. On one side, his father's cold, steadfast eyes. On the other, the hand of a law enforcement officer who acted like an enemy. Elijah wrote that he once believed only great and complex forces could change society, until he realized that even a harmless smile could expose a system's true face. He mentioned Ava, the woman who stood up for him with nothing but old memories and courage, and Jeremiah, who needed no title to do what was right. The clearest memory Elijah held was not the slap, but the moment his father laid down his badge without a word. That silence made Elijah realize real power did not come from shouting, but from choosing not to yield, even when forced into silence. He described fear not as fear of fists, but of being treated as invisible, and that hurt deeper than any bruise. When writing about his father, he did not call him a hero. He wrote, "My father did not stand up to save me. He stood there to let this system know it was being watched by someone it could not silence." Elijah told of the night Isaac was suspended and how he walked out of headquarters with his back straight, never looking back. He left that meaning unspoken, trusting readers to understand. The essay ended not with a call to action or slogan, but with a choice. Elijah said he wanted to study sociology and policy communication, not for revenge but to understand the mechanisms that allow a child to be beaten without anyone seeing wrong. He believed the system could not fix itself without insiders willing to say no. The final line affirmed, "I am not writing this to get accepted to school. I write to keep my memories before someone tries to rewrite them for me." Elijah saved the draft, stared at the screen for a long moment, then clicked send. Outside, the rain had stopped. The last raindrop slid down the glass, leaving a clear streak, as if something once weighed down was beginning to wash away. When the list of those under criminal investigation was released, the media's focus instantly turned to one person, Isaac Moore. They awaited his press conference, a symbolic speech, the emergence of a figurehead for the fight against police abuse. But Isaac said nothing. Interview requests filled his inbox, national outlets competing to pay for minutes of footage. His representative once suggested holding a public speech at the park, the site of the slap, as a way to reclaim justice visually. Isaac only shook his head. He refused all calls, did not appear at any forums, and former colleagues could not reach him. A week after Harold Crane's resignation, social media exploded over a single post. On Isaac's old personal page, dormant for over a year, appeared a brief status: "I don't need my child to be respected. I need him to live as a normal child." There were no images, hashtags, or comments. Yet within an hour, it spread across platforms. Supporters shared it with admiration. Some teachers printed it as posters in school hallways. On television, analysts called it a declaration of a new generation, where a father did not demand power, fame, or honor, but only the right for his child to live their age. The media could not explain why someone at the eye of the storm chose to end everything with one sentence. But those who followed the case understood Isaac never sought victory. From the start, what he wanted was a true recognition of human worth, beyond rank, skin color, or medals. After the post, he remained silent. A close friend revealed that Isaac began volunteer work at a counseling center for abuse victims under a different name. He sought no recognition and refused payment. Once invited to speak in a criminal justice class, he declined but sent a handwritten note to the instructor. Don't teach students to be good cops. Teach them not to become bad cops. No honors awaited Isaac Moore. Yet every week, people visited Wilford Park, standing silently before a newly placed plaque behind the trees. Inscribed were words he once wrote, with a small line below, "Excerpt from a father." Instead of leading a movement, Isaac withdrew from the spotlight. But that withdrawal became a full stop, not for a story of violence, but for the journey to reclaim a child's right to peace, through the calm and silence of a father who had endured the deepest wounds the system could inflict.